Hi everyone and welcome to Protocol 36, and today's video will be about the amazing Spider-Man and the Spider-Man comics that inspired this movie, continuing the video series that we are currently doing leading up to the release of Spider-Man No Way Home. Last week we just completed the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy and we'll be doing the Amazing Spider-Man 2 next week, but now we'll be looking at Andrew Garfield's first Spider-Man film, which was released in 2012. Keep in mind though, I won't be talking about how well the film has adapted those comics, just pointing out significant and small moments taken from the books, whether that be the overall story, character moments, visual references and more. Since once again this video series is more so celebrating each film adaptations and the source material itself. So before we get started, if at any point you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate if you could drop a like, as that would really help out the channel. Thank you. So let's get started. Even though the film is yet again another origin story for the web slinger, one of the comics the film mostly took inspiration from was from Ultimate Spider-Man's origin story. Then the comic that featured the first appearance of Spider-Man, which is obviously Amazing Fantasy 15. Actually, the first film on its own takes a lot from the Ultimate Universe, which makes a bit more sense because by that time the film came out, the Ultimate Peter Parker run had just finished, plus it was a modern take of Spider-Man at that time. So once again, it made a lot of sense to look at that series and borrow a lot of elements from it. Those of course being where Peter received the spider bite, that being in Oscorp in both universes, while in the Ultimate Universe it was a field trip. In the film, Peter sneaks into Oscorp to find Dr. Connors so that he could learn more about his father, but both were bitten by a genetically modified spider created by Oscorp Industries. Later on, when Peter was testing out his powers, he even goes to an abandoned warehouse to do so, and overall having a good time while using them, which was also taken from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, where Peter did the exact same thing, minus the whole skateboarding. Even though Uncle Ben doesn't exactly say with great power comes great responsibility to Peter word for word, he does say something very similar to his Ultimate counterpart, being about if you have the ability to do good, then it's your responsibility to do so. Even mentioning Peter's father, who believed in that philosophy, resulted to Peter getting angry, asking where his father is, and runs away. Also directly taken from the Ultimate comics. And Peter's last encounter with Uncle Ben. Afterwards, Peter even ignores the help of a shopkeeper to stop a mugger that he could easily take out but doesn't do it, because the shopkeeper was rude to him earlier, which was also a moment borrowed from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, specifically Ultimate Spider-Man issue 4, where the mugger who would later kill Uncle Ben also robbed the shop, where Peter also had the opportunity to stop him but doesn't, which proves to be a big mistake several pages later. The main difference being that even though Andrew's Peter Parker knew he was responsible for Uncle Ben's death, he was never able to catch his killer, while in the Ultimate Universe and pretty much every other adaptation of Spider-Man, he was able to pretty much learn to be more careful with his powers sooner. For the first time in the big budget Spider-Man films, we get to see Peter create mechanical web shooters, which is of course most famous for being Peter's invention, creating both the shooters and the web fluid. And in the film, he also creates the web shooters and buys the web fluid from Oscorp. Gwen also appears in the film and becomes the main love interest for this version of Spider-Man, and definitely seems to be a mixture of 616 and Ultimate Gwen Stacy, being the same high school class as Peter, while also being very intelligent too, kind of like Spectacular Spider-Man's Gwen Stacy. When it comes to Peter's father, Richard Parker, he also shares more similarities with his Ultimate version, where he was a well-respected scientist, while in the Ultimate comics he briefly worked for Trask Industries. In the film, it was of course Oscorp, creating the Venom symbiote and the genetically altered spiders, respectively. When it comes to the main villain himself, the Lizard, one of the main comics they looked at when it comes to his origin story in the film is his first appearance in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 6, where we learn how Dr. Connors became the Lizard, after losing his right arm in World War II. Afterwards, he began studying the characteristics of reptiles in order to grow it back, taking the DNA of a lizard. In order to create a serum he took, testing it which seemed to be a success, and even growing his arm back, though later on it was proved to be unsuccessful, leading him to become the Lizard, becoming more beast-like while also losing his intelligence too, making him want to pollute the earth with giant lizards. Towards the end of the issue, Peter uses Dr. Connors' notes, reverses the effects and creating a cure which will turn him back to normal, which Peter later does, making him drink the cure. All of those pretty much taken from the comics into the film. We don't know how exactly Dr. Connors lost his arm in the Amazing Spider-Man universe, just that he did lose it and had been trying to grow it back for decades, and was able to thanks to Peter giving him the formula his father created. Even though in the comics Peter was never responsible for turning Dr. Connors into the Lizard, this moment might have been borrowed from the Spider-Man animated series, where he was and even experimented on small mice, which they also did in the film. Whereas in the comics, Connors was responsible for the whole thing on his own, and experimented on a rabbit to see if it would work. And in the film, Gwen, with a little help from Peter, was able to help make the antidote, which would of course cure Connors and officers who turned into lizards. Even his design in the film was heavily inspired by Steve Ditko's design of the character, and briefly wears the classic lab coat too. 616 Dr. Connors also has a wife and son, Martha and Billy Connors. Billy of course being one of the reasons why he wanted to grow his arm back, so he could make Billy proud of him. While they don't appear in the film, his son Billy was supposed to, and even mentioned his wife briefly, but of course it was cut from the film. I thought I would mention them given how important they are to the Lizard. There was a moment in the film where Aunt May and Peter gets into an argument thanks to him always having to miss his curfew and getting bruises. While in the Ultimate comics he didn't always always come home with a face covered in bruises. Most of the times he did come home late, which sometimes caused Aunt May to ask where he was, leading to them having an argument. Another moment most likely taken from the Ultimate books was the school fight which took place in issue 6, where Peter fought the Green Goblin for the first time, and Norman went there because he knew Peter was Spider-Man, which also happened in the Amazing Spider-Man, where after the Lizard finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, he goes to his school and fights him. In the first official fight, after their encounter in the bridge scene, both Spider-Man and the Lizard have a fight in the sewers, which is obviously a recurring location where the two fought in the comics and other adaptations like shows and games. He even tries to get photos of the Lizard to win a reward from the Daily Bugle, which of course is taken from the comics, but also the animated series, where Jameson also said that he will give a reward to anyone who's able to get photos of the Lizard. While on the show he was successful, in the movie he wasn't so lucky. When it comes to Grant's father, George Stacy, while most part of the film he thought Spider-Man was a criminal, when he finds out that it was actually Peter and realizes that he's actually trying to help, he starts seeing Spider-Man as a hero and not a criminal anymore. Kind of like in the comics, but the main difference in the original source material is that he was always a big supporter of the Webhead and even figured out that Peter was Spider-Man sometime before he died. His death in the movie is also pretty similar, where he was with him when he was dying in both instances, taken straight from the Amazing Spider-Man issue 90. Even though how he died was different, as he was accidentally killed by Doc Ock in the comic, in the film he was intentionally killed by the Lizard. It does ultimately lead to Peter feeling guilty and making a promise to George. But instead of Captain Stacy telling Peter to keep Gwen safe like he does in issue 90, in the movie it was switched up to him making Peter promise that he would stay away from her so that she doesn't get hurt or worse. In the film we even get to see George's funeral, though unlike in the comics, Peter wasn't there for Gwen thanks to the promise he had to make to her father, but secretly attended to check on Gwen. We also see Flash Thompson going from bullying Peter Parker to becoming friends with him, which also happens in the comics, specifically in university, while in the film it was towards the end of their high school journey. And we even see how he becomes a fan of Spider-Man, as that was always the case in the comics, where he's a Spider-Man fanboy. When Peter reveals to Gwen that he's Spider-Man, he's also putting the moves on her, which might have been taken from Ultimate Spider-Man issue 13, where Peter reveals the secret to Mary Jane, also making his moves, which of course was done differently. Later in the film, Garfield's Peter even takes Gwen web swinging to spend more time together, which is something Peter has often done in the comics with Mary Jane. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 45, Peter defeats the Lizard by going to a train that contains a refrigerator car in order to weaken him. And in the film, Peter also tries to defeat him by freezing him with the help of George Stacy, which is proven to be effective against him. The moment where Peter gets shot and handcuffed by the police was also most likely taken from the Ultimate Spider-Man issue 30, where the same thing happens to Peter, and even breaks out of the handcuffs afterwards, using his spider strength. Even though Kirk Connors and Richard Parker's friendship wasn't an original idea for the film, in the Ultimate Universe, Dr. Connors did have some respect for Richard and even wanted to research on the Venom symbiote Richard created alongside Eddie Brock Sr. In the Ultimate Universe, he also worked for a famous corporation, that being Stark Industries, while of course in the film it was Oscorp he was working for. And lastly, the final shot looks very similar to the pose Spider-Man makes in the covers of both Amazing Spider-Man issue 300 and issue 301, which seems to be an homage to those iconic comic covers, which looks really cool to be honest. But yeah, that's all I could find when it comes to the comics that inspired the first Amazing Spider-Man film. If I've missed anything, please politely let me know in the comments down below, and let me know your thoughts too. Next week we'll be looking at the comics that inspired the Amazing Spider-Man 2, so I would love it if you stay tuned for that. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, please like, and want more, subscribe. To begin, Protocol 36.